addresses the question of what is the difference between hospitality and inclusion, which is something that we need to have in the back of our minds as we go through our services and as we welcome new people. And Patrick is not new, but he is with us, hopefully, to come to be a permanent part. He was part of our Zoom back in the COVID days. And I said I didn't recognize him because he didn't have the ocean behind him. That was such a nice treat to see that. And we really enjoyed him. He has a connection with us because he is Storm's father, if you remember Storm. So I'm sure we do. So today we want to look at what is the church. We were in that section. And a couple of questions that I think might be useful. How do we know when the church is alive? One of the ways of describing the church is as an organism. Paul did that preaching. And he said each part is important and vital for the well-functioning of the whole, which is true. And one day I asked a question about what is the most important part of the church. And I thought that Shasta had the perfect answer. She said it's the part that hurts at the moment. The part that doesn't feel right or doesn't feel good or is not functioning properly. So as we go through, keep in the back of your head, how do we know when the church is alive? Is it necessarily because we have more people? I wouldn't think so either, but that's how we tend to measure it. And unfortunately, that's the way the conference tends to measure it, at least in part. It's how many members you have, how many people are coming to your church. Is it alive? Is it well? Or is it sick? How do you know what the difference is between a healthy church and a church that's tired or not feeling well or is about to expire? And in the Methodist denomination, we've had some examples of churches that have expired. Yes.
Before coming here, I went to like 5 or 6 different churches trying to find a home church, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think a church is alive when you're connecting to each other and to the Holy Spirit as well. I won't name any names for the sake of being nice, but I went to some bigger churches hoping to, you know, connect with more people my age. And like, just to be really Southern, it was deader than a doornail. Like it was a social club. It wasn't a church. It was just a big group of people meeting together to me to get a very washed down version of the gospel, because it was almost more of a motivational speech than connecting with the Bible and connecting with the Holy Spirit. I was like, oh, no thanks, this isn't for me.
So the center of the church, I guess that would be a spot to sort of try to get the identity straight of the church. What is the center of the church? Is it social activities? And social activities are very important because they do allow you to know your neighbor, know the person who's sitting next to you in the pew, and to join together in activities.
Jo Ann, I think this Sunday school class is a core for this church. Mm-hmm. And the main thing I appreciate about this is the sharing of ideas and values.
That's very well said. There are probably some other cores of the church that may have been more active during times of growth or during times of decline, when we have a very active administrative council. And I know Margaret is working hard to get that done. So we have opportunities to have a number of different cores. If your body didn't have a nervous system, it'd just be a blob, right?
I think another vital part too is our music.
Oh, yes.
It's just exceptional.
And one of the ways that it said that you could tell that the church was alive was in witnessing. And in witnessing, music was a big, if you sing together. Now, I don't sing well, so I try to do it discreetly. So it's not to offend people who are more talented. And the key to bridging hospitality with evangelism. How do you do that? That's one of the questions that will be answered hopefully by these three things: witnessing, invitation, nurture, and initiation. But if you take nothing else, take this, what he says is the key. And it goes back to the Wesley brothers. Perfect love of Christ will be perfect love of others. We don't have to like everybody, but we should try to love everybody. It's not the easiest thing in the world sometimes, but if you can put yourself in the other's position, at least temporarily, you may get an insight into what makes them tick and what makes their lives difficult or painful. So Heath, could we see if we can look in and finish?
Again, I reference COVID. It has been challenging, it's been difficult in so many ways, but it also has given us opportunities and reasons to try and do some things just a little differently. So we wanted to say, well, we've never done it that way before. That's not how we do it. Well, how can we do things differently and to reach those who we may not have reached before? A part of the virtual church, again, is that you have people worshiping with you now, not just in your local community or city or even state, but from across the country. Have you had that experience where there are people you worship with you from other states? How do we show them hospitality so that they feel welcome even in a virtual community? How do we do what my colleague Rob Hutchinson calls the both and? How do we have a hybrid experience of in-person and virtual? How do we show hospitality in those situations and environments? What a wonderful opportunity. And to get our young people involved in this. You know, they connect in all kinds of ways through social media. Some of us may not be as comfortable with it, but they are. Matter of fact, I tease my college-age daughter about, having an actual conversation with some people, not just texting and doing it through social media. That's their world. That's their reality. How does the church show hospitality to them and to all people, different cultures, different races, different backgrounds, different ages? Again, some practical things for us to consider. Let us now turn our attention to evangelism. And you're welcome to put this in the chat. What is evangelism? How would you define evangelism? What is evangelism?
Does it have a positive meaning?
Scripture references for that as well, both Old and New Testament.
So it can be.
You see those references there on the screen, on the slide. So again, feel free to take a screenshot of that or to write that down. one definition is the active calling of people to respond to the message of grace and commit oneself to God in Jesus Christ. There are Old and New Testament scripture references there. And I think it's important for us to be mindful that to have a holistic approach to evangelism, to give people various opportunities to respond to the kingdom of heaven. Reading out to those who are not part of the body, reaching out to those who are not part of the body of Christ. Thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to talk about three components of evangelism. Proclamation, number one. Number two, invitation. And number three, initiation. Evangelism is proclamation, invitation, and initiation. Proclamation, witnessing, telling the story of Jesus Christ and his love, and offering the gospel to them, sharing his offer of salvation to them. I love to tell the story. It will be my theme and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. Do you know that hymn?
Are you all comfortable with that?
No.
I'm not comfortable with that.
Can you
With that.
Here's the tune in your head right now.
I just wondered.
I see you nodding
But
and
we
you
have to
smiling.
remember that in the
I love to tell the story.
period,
That's evangelism.
Can you pause?
Telling the story.
sorry, no, I think
No.
it's very appropriate because I have a sort of a positive take on that hymn because it was one of my mother's favorites, and she would sing it as she washed the dishes in the kitchen. So it was, she was not using it as a witness. I think she was using it as a comforting kind of assurance, which in itself is a witness, if it means something to the person who is singing it, or thinking it, or doing it. Now, if you're on the street and when somebody comes up to you and wants to tell you that story, you may have a different reaction because you wonder why they might be doing it, but maybe they are sincere and maybe they are genuine. So how do we approach that? How do we handle that? When someone comes up to you and says, "Are you saved?" Oh dear.
I've gotten it a few times in my life.
From what?
Yeah.
What's the rest of this?
About 100
Yeah, saved from what?
But is that because we're putting our values on that question?
But to me, the deception is it's incomplete. When they ask, are you saved?
Do you know how to answer that question?
No, they can give you enough
I'm
information.
saved, you're saved, we're all saved.
You don't know.
That doesn't, you know, you
Huh?
can
You
say,
have to mean that.
you can say I'm saved.
No, you're fine.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say,
Oh,
I was sitting here thinking. I just think it means different things to different people, and everybody has, it's such a loaded topic, you know. I mean, even evangelism, you know, in my mind, you know, I don't know, there's so many examples of evangelists that really don't understand the scripture like I understand it, or have a different understanding, maybe a better way to put it. So, I've talked to pastors even, and this is a related subject, especially in this area, but I've talked to pastors that interacted with the Billy Graham Crusade, and they had very negative interaction. This company has to pay so much money for his people to come in and do his thing, share his films, and it's a very, although I think the scripture is right, my humble opinion, but, and then the son who embraces Putin and his beliefs. Anyway, so long way of saying I think evangelism means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and you say you're saved means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I had a person like grilling me on that one time and said, well, what was the moment you were saved? I'm like, well, it was kind of a gradual process. There wasn't like some lightning bolt moment when,
So is it a journey?
It's definitely a journey.
You can't say, well, I'm saved from stress and unhappiness.
Can you let me know where to get that?
What?
Can you let me know where to get that?
Yeah, to me, that's what religion is. Take away the stress and unhappiness. If it doesn't do that, I don't know any part of it.
Well,
Pretty hard to say, isn't it?
Well, the gospel says, the gospel means what? Good news?
Mm.
If you have good news, do you want to share it?
So they shouldn't be asking, are you saved? They should say, guess what? I'm saved.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, let me tell you my story.
Yeah.
I think that's also, the are you saved question very much comes from a Baptist, especially Southern Baptist perspective. I grew up missionary Baptist, and we used to joke we're the worst of the worst for evangelism. But I remember the moment I got saved, when I did the first prayer confession, and I thought I would feel different, if that makes sense. Like in the superhero movies, when like the power goes through them for the first time, and they're like, And I was so disappointed that it didn't happen like that. I thought it didn't take. I was like, let's try this again. Because if y'all ever been to especially a missionary Baptist service, when the pastor tells, because it's never a her, it's a his story of salvation, it sounds like something out of the movies. Like meteors have flown down from heaven and the angel chorus has opened up. And I was at a youth conference with 6,000 other pubescent tweens, and I was like, this is not that feeling. But I think the idea for me of salvation, I used to think it was like a Dunkin' Dunn situation, like you're frying chicken or something. But it's like going into a pool, like a gradually lifting pool, and sometimes you'll get out in the deep end where your feet don't touch and it still scares you and you start flailing again. But then God reminds you that it's okay. You know how to swim. You know what I mean? And when someone asks, are you saying you're saved? I'm like, I tell people my life is centered in God and God's goodness. And I strive to share that with others.
In other words, we're all working on it. It's not a fait accompli.
Oh no. If it's complete,
Never.
We would, stay as close to Christ as possible. And I don't mean just in a feeling sense, I mean as in a literal sense, we'd be near perfection, I think, if we would.
I had a issue with the order. What was it? Invitation?
Yeah.
Invitation? No, invitation was the second. It was
Conviction,
proclamation, invitation, and what was the last one?
The last one is nurture and initiation.
I think he's got the thing all backwards. You start with nurture, you move to invitation, and then you can get the proclamation.
Okay, so let's think about that, because I think there are many paths that go to Ashland. You could go by way of Marshall. You could go straight on the highway, the 4-lane, which is one way. But you could, if you were wanting just to browse around the countryside, you could go down to South Carolina and then come back up if you wanted to. but your destination is the same. But I think we get hung up with thinking there has to be just one way. Maybe there's one way that's more common, but I think there are many ways to get there.
Good.
Maybe we're in too big a hurry to get there too. And so we take the most direct route, which may or may not be the route we need to take.
So should the church allow, if the church is allowed and inclusive and presenting a meaningful kind of service to the people who are members there, should we allow for differences? Do we all have to say the same words in the same exact?
All means all, right?
You know, for truly reconciling, it doesn't matter, does it?
And if you start with nurture,
It follows.
and it all and they end up with a proclamation at the end, which is where you want to go, but it allows, like you said, but you take their own path.
And I think your life can be a witness, not just what you say, not just what comes out of your mouth.
And I think that's more important than what you say. Because I know people who come to me and said, "Are you saved?" And then I saw how they were living their life, and I was going like,
Didn't want to say
I
salvation,
don't think I was part of
What
that.
does salvation look like?
run away from it.
Yeah.
But we probably should be careful not to dismiss or look askance at those people who take very literally the command to go and tell all people. I have a somewhat different view of that. If a person has a religion that works for them in Timbuktu, I'm not sure that it's my mission to go and change that. But if we live in a way that shows nurturing and shows kindness and love, that may be as good as we can hope for. That's a big enough one. You brought up Billy Graham, but I have met people who I respected a lot who say they got saved at a Billy Graham crusade.
Right. It's kind of like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. My humble opinion, I think his theology's right. Unlike some of the prosperity gospels and other stuff that are very popular. And kind of you think about congregation, yes, the guy preaching prosperity gospel, that if you believe only great things will happen in your life, has huge congregations. He makes a lot of money. They pay a lot of big money to come to his sermons. If you judged him just by his congregation, he's on TV, sold out, whatever. Yeah. But I've been close friends with a couple of pastors, and they would tell me about being encouraged by Billy Graham, and he's like, you had to pay so many dollars to use even his projectors and his films and his.
There's the cost to something.
Yeah, and even they weren't going out the baby with the bathwater, but just, I don't know.
Well, a small example is that we used to do the shoebox thing at Christmas time, which is the Billy Graham ministry.
Right.
And we had some difficulty with the things that were being put into the shoebox after we filled it with whatever designated toys or socks or whatever we put in. So we decided not to continue that as it was currently being administered. I don't know whether that was a good choice or not a good choice.
We just shifted our focus to local children. And not to be ugly, but for a long time, Baptists have stepped over the local poverty to see the global poverty because it's Instagram worthy.
That bothers me.
So what did the thing say? Look for the limb that's in your own eye before you criticize the person who has a speck of dust in theirs. So we have a lot to do that we could very much improve on, and a lot to do. But we should be able to recognize when something is not right and work to make it right. Work to really nurture, not to put Band-Aids on things that are more serious. Yeah.
I can say that I've been across the world when the shoe boxes arrived. They arrived in July sometimes, just so you know. And I don't think they do me harm.
Okay.
I mean, if you're concerned about whether that was harmful, I don't think they've done any harm. I know how, from our perspective, how they're here to be used. I'm not sure how much good they do either. So, you know, I can just give you, that's my experience of seeing them arrive and then given out in the Muslim community.
So maybe what we ought to concentrate on is what is the most meaningful thing that we can do with our resources when we want to nurture. And who are the people that we can help? Okay, so sorry about that. See? We may not make it through this thing, but hopefully we will.
So that we proclaim the kingdom of heaven. We proclaim Jesus as Lord. We proclaim Jesus as Savior. That there's no salvation outside of his lordship and kingdom. We proclaim grace. We proclaim his death. We proclaim his crucifixion, his death and resurrection. We proclaim it. We proclaim what it is we believe about who Jesus is. About who God is, who the Holy Spirit is, who we are as believers. There are people who used to come around, and they still do in some communities, and they'll ring your doorbell, knock on your door, and they have pamphlets for you. They want to tell you about what they believe. You know, even before COVID, there were some who would, close the blinds, kind of hide, pretend you're not home. And some of that has to do with, well, I'm not sure what I believe. I'm not sure how to express or how to share my beliefs. The Apostles' Creed, the traditional version of the Apostles' Creed, is a very, very good way to share your belief. I believe. It's personal. It's not even a belief statement for a congregationalist or a community as a whole. It's personal. I believe. Telling the story. And there are various ways to tell that story. There's some of you on this call who have the gift of writing. You write poems, you write books, memoir, you write. You have a gift of writing. And so for you, you say, well, I would love to be creative and write and share with others the gospel of Jesus Christ. Some of you have the gift of singing. So your version of telling the story is through song. Some is through the spoken or preached word. Some of you are extroverts and very much a people person. You just love people. You love being around people and engaging people, strangers at the grocery store. You're one of those people when you're in line, you just have a whole conversation with the cashier or the person behind you. You just love that energy. You feed off of that energy. And because of your love of Christ so much, you share. And I'll tell you another thing. I believe that there are people who literally see the light of Christ in us. That there's just something about we who are believers. That you'll find yourself in situations and people are sharing personal information and situations that they would never share normally. Or when you see someone, you offer them a smile. How that just blesses some people who needed that. They've been frowned at all day long. Criticized all day long. And you genuinely smile. Hi, how are you? That's hospitality. That's also evangelism, sharing the light and love of Christ. And sometimes that leads to conversations. Someone says, have a blessed day. Not just a good day, but have a blessed day. Someone shares and you say, I'm holding and remembering you in my prayers. I'll be praying for you. I'll be thinking with you. That's hospitality. That's evangelism. Sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his love. There's so much bad news. And now we used to say, 24-hour news channels. But now it's social media and other, you get alerts on your phone all day long about things happening. Tragedies in the world. What a wonderful opportunity to be witnesses of God's love in Jesus Christ. Even to the strangers. I have a whole other presentation where we talk about what it means to be a neighbor. Because oftentimes we think of a neighbor as just as someone, my next door neighbor. Or someone I know, someone I'm familiar with and comfortable with, have a relationship with, a friendship with. Those are my neighbors. And when Jesus tells the story, the parable and the story of the man who fell, the stranger, the man who fell among thieves, and the Samaritan who was a neighbor to that man. Jesus asked, who was neighbor? Who was the neighbor? Not who was the good neighbor. Who was the neighbor? Not your neighbor. Not. Who was the neighbor? Who is our neighbor? Yes, the stranger. They may not look like us. They may not have the same dialect. They may be from a different part of the country. They may be a northerners. They may be from a different part of the world, speak a different language, have a different accent, have a different skin color, have a different socioeconomic background. Who is the stranger? Who is our neighbor? And who are we as the church? Can we be the church and not show hospitality to the stranger and to our neighbors? Can we be the true church? That's a particularly poignant question at this time in our lives and in our history to remind ourselves of what it means to be the church. So we proclaim, we witness, we tell the story. And then we also invite. Second part of evangelism is invitation. We invite others, particularly the stranger, to know and confess Jesus Christ as Savior. We invite them to share the gospel story so that it becomes their story. We invite them and we even compel them. Going back again to the parable Jesus tells. Going into the hedges and the highways, compel them to come, to invite them to this wonderful banquet, this feast.
Maybe we could stop right there.
We invite others.
Consider that bit.
And in liberation theology, there's a concept of deep.
As people move into Marshall, and as the community enlarges, which is doing dramatically, do we tend to close in on the relationships that we already have? Or do we try to expand our relationships and at least offer a welcome to the people who are coming in? And if we want to offer a welcome, how do we do that?
For me, I actually tend to interact with a lot of people from out of town that are new. And that's also because I guess a lot of people my age have moved out, and so those that are moving in are kind of really the only social scene I have around here. I don't know if you guys know, I like to play Dungeons and Dragons, which is like a very interactive role-playing board game. And so, I go there and you kind of just develop this community of out-of-town people, because let's be honest, there's not a whole lot of good old boys that are really down to, fight metaphorical dragons and just kind of be silly for a couple of hours. So, but it's really interesting because a lot of the people, especially that are my age, are moving into town. They're moving into town because they want to revive the good parts of what used to be Southern living, like homesteading and canning, and I know people that have goats and chickens, and they moved here from New York, and they're like, yeah, we just got like a little group of chickens, and I'm like, oh, good luck. But it's really beautiful, and because I'm considered the only lifer, I get this opportunity to be like, hey, what do you know about canning, or what do you know about goats? Because I have a couple of friends that have goats, and they're like, yeah, we're about to have our first baby goat. Do you know how that process goes? And growing up on farm life, I kind of have a handle. I'm like, let me point you in the right direction to some resources. It's been really great because I get to share little bits of how I grew up, and they're actually interested in knowing about it.
So would you ever, do you see a way that the church, this church, could provide something for some of these people?
I like what the Judies did to reach out into that new community out there, and y'all can tell about that, I'll let you tell about it.
Well,
The bulbs or whatever.
Emily was the one who said, we really need to, and it really wasn't only Emily, it was a lot of England. And they said, with all those new folks moving in, that we have an opportunity to invite them. And so the good news is, we did initially. The bad news is, we didn't follow up so much. And that is probably a missed opportunity. So I think I'm prepared to say, if there were others that would like to work on it, I think we would make some inroads and some visits. When I was in real estate, we used to do an exercise called farming. And if there was a particular subdivision, really not subdivisions around here so much, but what you would do is you would send promotional material, promoting yourself as the realtor of choice when they go to sell their home. And I see the same sort of thing happening here, but the important thing when we did our farming, and we did call it farming, was dripping. And so what you would do is Easter's coming up, you would drip on them. It's a very nice invitation to come to our service on Easter. And then, in the spring, take some bulbs, or not bulbs, seeds, whatever. And then maybe on the 4th of July, sometimes we would plant the entire neighborhood with little plaques up on the driveways and do things like that. And for the most part, it was very well received. People enjoyed it. We used flags that were, I'm not suggesting you put flags, I'm just giving you examples of things. We had flags that were made in the USA. We didn't get, foreign China flags. And we hired high school kids to go plant the flags for us. And so there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities that exist. That, however, those are all exterior of us dripping on them. The one thing that keeps coming out in our conversations here is to find out what can we do for you. So that's the thing that would be different. I'm not sure how you would do that other than maybe putting a three question questionnaire in their hands.
One of the things that was suggested at one time was that if we could provide a morning out for mothers with child care, but we have the play school now, but in the summer we don't. So we might think of that.
There are several families in that whole community that have children, young children, that might be so plan on in the summer.
I think for my age group, especially the group that I spend a lot of time with, they've turned away from the church because they've been hurt by the church. Most of them grew up Roman Catholic, and they've just been very burned by the church, and or either told they were not enough, or they were constantly failing, or like their self-esteem was kind of just crushed by that you're not enough mentality that tends to happen. So I think first step is just kind of showing that we're striving to repair the bad parts of the church. That sort of nurturing even of ourselves and of the community. Like showing I'm sorry that your church hurt you. We don't agree with the grinding down of your self-esteem and of your soul into submission. We want to build you up. And I've kind of been doing that in little ways. Like I let people know that I'm a minister. And at first they tend to be hesitant. And I'll say, yeah, I'm a minister, and we're one of the only LGBTQIA affirming churches in the county. And that gives people a little smile. They're like, oh, I kind of thought that would be contradictory to your beliefs. So just little things like that that's showing we're here for them. And not just for ours. We're not here to push our agenda further, but to bring everyone in with it.
We should ask you, do you think if you brought a Dungeons and Dragons game for our game night, they would come here or not?
That's a good question because of the fact that you do have to have a series of things. Like you have to have what's called a dungeon master, which is someone who sets up the whole game and things like that. I think one thing maybe we could do is, because the place I go to is very established, we could provide snacks.
I was wondering about that.
They love snacks. There's some snacky people.
Oh, just for you to take, go to the.
Yeah, you guys could come on Thursdays as well in Marshall. They have all those events down there. Just kind of being open and being.
Where do you need?
Do you know where the old funeral home used to be in Marshall? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, my brain though. It's you know where my sister's attic is.
Yes, I volunteer there.
Yeah, it's right across the street, pretty much from that beside where the Youth Arts Council is. It goes post office, Youth Arts Council, then the comic book store.
Yes. So you mean the comic book store?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a neat little place.
Yeah. I'm actually friends with the couple that runs it. They're from New York. And they're both what they call themselves as former Catholic. So.
Well, that's interesting.
Well, you know, it's so ironic, because, I mean, there's been like very fundamentalist Christians that call out D&D as something other than just a game, so.
Yeah. No, I get some side eye when I tell
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I play D&D, and they're like, oh. I'm like,
Worshiping the devil.
I'm like, we're having a drug-free group hallucination for 2 hours. It really sounds like a terrible time.
I know, I mean, it's just that ignorance of, you know, I mean, there have been people that came out against J.J. Rollins,
Yeah.
who's very Christian, and said, oh, no, you can't. You don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, your assignment for next week is to mull this over and see if you can come up with some better understanding of what this man is talking about and how that could or does not apply to our church. We may decide that it doesn't, but we might decide we could modify it and make it something that we could support. Okay,
Thank you, Joanne.
thank you for being
Well, you know
here.
what, I've got to say, as a nursing home administrator, so often our residents come in and the church they went to for 40 years, they never see them again, no contact, no nothing. And it's just heartbreaking. So when you guys did your ministry, you know, like maybe it sounds self-serving as a nursing home administrator, but when you did your ministry across the street, that's just wonderful. And believe me, you can have the best run nursing home, but you always have such a need for more programming, more ministry. Especially with COVID, I mean, it just, what little we had died during COVID. So I thought that was great.
Well, we're trying to work on it some more. Lucy has come up with a wonderful idea for participation in doing singing in the rain whenever the COVID thing is lifted.
But you guys did that on the 25th, right?
They wouldn't let us because they had COVID.
They went, oh, okay, yeah, it's so weird. We're still in that high COVID, you know?
Yeah.
I'm in a shield and mask at work all the time. Well, that's another tangent, but like a lot of churches are like seeking exemptions for vaccination and all that, saying it's part of the Christian doctrine. I'm not sure how that works.
And you said that Jean Robinson is at your place?
She is.
Is she able to have visitors?
Oh yeah, there's never been a time you couldn't have visitors.
You just can't take her anything, any food. I took a little plant and they said that we got Alzheimer's patients, they need good plants.
Right.
And so when I said, here's to somebody that can have one.
Right.
So you can't take anything.
Yeah.
She really, well, I went to visit her, she really, you know, at the moment enjoyed it, and I remember, it's just some more things that I thought might jog her memory. You know,
Yeah.
it seemed to click just a little bit, and then it went off, you know, how that's like.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, on just the nature of Alzheimer's, I mean, you have that crystallized memory from way back when, you remember everything, but then recent bad or like. But if you take a child to like an Alzheimer's unit, like when Monica was 2, I'd take Monica, and children just had this sense about it. But I'd have like these ladies that were very far into dementia, but they'd stand up and they'd take her hand and they'd walk up and down the Alzheimer's unit. And,
People with dementia and Alzheimer's
yes,
really respond to music.
and music. Oh my
My
God,
mom
yes.
had Alzheimer's, and
Yes.
one of the things that, the only time I could get her to smile is when I would sing to her, and I'm great, but
Not happening.
like, I love to tell a story, she liked that one.
Well,
In
this
the
is,
garden.
I
Oh
talked
yeah,
to
old gospel hymns are exactly right. They'll remember those forever.
Lisa, our minister, about, she went to visit her, and she said she sang something, and she really liked it.
Yeah, and I think, taking gifts and things is one thing, but most of the people really like for you just to come and talk to them, or read to them, or sing sing to them, whatever. I went to see Emily and Molly yesterday, and I took them the meal, that was the requirement. But what they really wanted was just for somebody to come and visit and spend time with them.
Breath of fresh air, yes.
Well, I'm not sure how fresh I am.
How is she doing?
Yesterday was not a good day. She said she has good days and bad days, and she was having a hard time getting around yesterday. I think she was in a lot of pain. But it's so funny. Wally is so good with her, and he made her some kind of a drink that had chocolate in it, and she said, anytime chocolate is a good thing. She loves chocolate, and so that was, a good thing, a good moment with her. But yeah, it was good. It's always fun to talk to Wiley. He is such
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting? Y'all probably know this. Yeah. Wiley's sister lives across the street from my parents in Greenville, South Carolina. And I was actually talking to Wiley's brother-in-law yesterday in his yard. He was working his yard, so they just got back from Nashville from their son's.
well, he did. She couldn't
Oh,
go.
she didn't go. Okay.
She couldn't go.
Okay.
No, her daughter came and stayed with her.
Did he say how that was, Margaret?
Well,
Did he talk about it at all?
it was good, but Wiley had a couple of accidents while he was there.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he fell and hurt his knee. He was playing basketball with his grandson and fell and hurt his knee really badly. He was having a hard time getting around. And then he got up and he was going to go into the kitchen, and he said, I don't know why, but I fell flat face on the kitchen table. And he couldn't remember anything. He was like, and so they took him to the emergency room or to the urgent care and had him checked out. And I know he's probably having to follow up with that, but he was limping around yesterday on his knee.
Was that at home?
That was in Nashville.
In Nashville.
While he was there.
It might have been a strange place, but that's very sobering.
Well, now before he fell, didn't you say that he spoke at his son's?
No, I didn't hear that. The part of it that he told me was that between 500 and 600 people were at that celebration.
But somebody said he spoke.
I believe he did. He had a big part in it of some kind. He'd written out a lot, and that gave me the
He
idea.
teaches a class at Vanderbilt, and I
That he
was
was gonna
surprised.
speak.
A lot of the students and people from Vanderbilt knew him.
He was a country music